building. It's about representation of unemployed workers. Bruce, are you happy using that?
I'm just going to lay it down here and give myself some reminders about what we do.
I'm happy
I might hold it up.
If you need
So,
a human tripod.
I shall be my own human tripod. I shall try my best. So we started this morning's session with trying to understand a bit about what representation actually means. So working out what it is, why it was needed, and the barriers, particularly for not just service users, but people who are representing unemployed workers. So we went through a list of different things in terms of generally what representation involves from our own, different experiences. When we were looking at why it was needed, there's the issues regarding isolation and vulnerability of service users, but there is also, a number of particular themes which I think have already been mentioned about sanctions and the concern that people have about the intimidation in accessing benefits. In terms of the barriers, I mean, in the southwest we're in a very vast geographical region, and access is always a big point in terms of there are people who are, for example, digitally excluded, but they might also have other types of barriers as well in terms of accessing information and resources. Organising those individuals is a very difficult task, and the barriers for people who are looking to represent unemployed workers, of course, raises lots and lots of complicated logistical problems, which I suppose a lot of people can relate to when they're involved with trade unions and representing trade union members. At the end of the morning session, the key problems that we thought had to be addressed by the particular issue that we've got was, firstly, the underrepresentation of a vulnerable group of people within our society. The second was identifying how best to use the finite time and resources that we all have in terms of trying to represent people. And then, of course, we wanted some concluding best next steps for people to be able to take. So those were sort of the points that we focused on this afternoon after lunch, and we were talking, when looking at underrepresentation, I mean, there was quite obviously a varied discussion, and lots of it overlaps with what you've already heard back in terms of feedback. But in terms of identifying the demand for the service, in terms of representing unemployed people, the underrepresented, the who, the where, the what, the fact that there actually is a problem, there is a demand for people to be represented who are unemployed. Trying to respect and listen carefully to those people's individual choices, trying to come up with some outcomes, trying to at the end of the process being able to say, well, look, this is actually what's been achieved, and of course all the benefits that come with that. I mean, there is obviously some difficulties in terms of competing demands. There's always going to be that. There's always going to be a need to come up with some plan and sort of touched upon ideas about minimum standards, which of course you've already sort of heard a bit about. But the fact that people are being heard in a non-judgmental way and offered some choice or guidance, we thought was a particularly important aspect of underrepresentation of unemployed people. Categorising needs was another point that we thought was quite important in terms of understanding what the problem is to be able to address it. We spent some time talking about time, the finite time and resources that we've all got as individuals. When you're trying to help someone else, we're all sort of driven by trying to help other people, but actually a big part of what we do involves understanding ourselves and understanding that actually there's only so much you can do in a day, in a week, in a month, in a year. And being able to achieve that realistically with resilience is actually a very, very difficult thing. One of the things that we also talked about was communication, and the need, when you're looking at particularly trying to manage a finite time or resource, the need for efficient communication. The difference between how people react to one-to-one, face-to-face communication and communication which is, for example, over the telephone and through IT. So we obviously talked a bit about the systems and the need to collaborate and work with colleagues, friends, and develop the way in which things are being done at the moment. So we came up with some ideas for best next steps. They're sort of loosely overlapping. They're probably in keeping with a lot of the points that you've already heard and will hear today. In terms of time and resources, best next steps, there has to be better access, not just for service users in terms of people that need advice when they are unemployed, but people that are representing unemployed people. Access to information about relevant rules and regulations, obviously, but also support. Being able to count on contacting friends and colleagues. There's points about, obviously, the funding of that type of work. There's also points about the development for the individuals delivering that type of service. But I suppose one big theme, and particularly with today's session, today's event as a whole, it's about solidarity. It's about finding like-minded groups and showing support for vulnerable people that need that help against being isolated, against the challenges that they face. Trying to come up with a system which is effective in terms of its communication. The social media presence, obviously that's something which is being looked at all the time by all different types of organisations. Being delivered in a respectful way, and also, of course, enabling organisation. It's all, I suppose, points which is second nature to all of us involved with trade unions, but it's always, I think, something which is worth reiterating, the fact that it is with a plan in mind. It's to be able to allow people not just to be individuals, but to be part of a collective, because of course as a collective we will be all that much stronger. The evidence for change, I think, is an important part in terms of recording the outcomes and being able to identify relevant minimum standards. These are all aspects, which are, I suppose, to some extent, large macro ideas, but we have to have that evidence to be able to say, well, this is why there's a need for change. This is why change has got to happen. But yeah, I mean, essentially, it was a very interesting session. I don't know if any of the other participants have got any other points to add, but thank you very much for listening.